Hey there, and welcome to a brand new series of Sheltered Stasis scenario. For those of you who are new to Sheltered, there are two main modes, Survival and Scenario. Survival is your standard game mode, but we will be playing one of the scenarios. In Surrounded, you are stuck in your base, left to defend it for 50 days before you can win. And in Stasis, you must rebuild a rocket to obtain victory. As this scientist is explaining, the fallout on Earth has lasted for 66.5 years, and these 4 people are all humanity has left. Our objectives are to build the spaceship, collect human embryos found at the laboratories, collect as many books as possible, protect the base's power generator, and most importantly, we must survive. As soon as we are given control of our characters, we will start surviving by planting seeds with fertilizer in both of our planters. We only start with 4 food, and with 4 people to feed, not growing food immediately is just asking for a rough start. While Gregory and Nancy plant the seeds, we can have Mark deconstruct the rock sculpture, and Lucy can begin deconstructing the cryogenic chambers the family has spent the last 66 years in. With some free time available, I will rearrange the shelter so that the objects that don't require interaction from the family are out of the way, and the objects that do require someone to interact with them are clustered together so that less time will be spent walking back and forth across the base. Now that that's taken care of, we can spend some time taking a more in-depth look at what is required to build the rocket. We can see here that there are 8 different parts that we need to build the rocket, and in the workbench we can see what we need to build each of those parts. So it looks like each of those parts takes a handful of common components along with various things that are only found at laboratories, with the exception of the coolant, which we will be obtaining from the cryo chambers that we came out of. While we are in the workbench, let's take a look at some of the things that can be made here. The only notable things that can be made in Tier 1 are bandages and first aid kits. First aid kits can be used to stop bleeding and heal our survivors, and therefore we should always try to keep a few of them on hand. The only item of importance in the Tier 2 category is the punching bag. Having at least 2 punching bags inside of our shelter will give our survivors a productive way to spend their time when they are at the shelter. Plus, training our combat skills is always a good idea. You never know what surprises might be waiting for us. Tier 3 has a lockpick set, but although we will keep the item in mind, we have better things to be made first. Tier 4 is where most of the high tier stuff is. We will eventually make all of this tier, but there are 2 projects that are more important than the rest. Recycling plant is the gateway to obtaining significantly more material from all of our scavenging runs, so after we build some punching bags and a stove, this will be our primary focus. The stove we will be building is the stove in this same tier. The stove is the most important thing to build first, because it reduces the chance for food poisoning and maximizes food effectiveness. Here we can see some of the components we gained from deconstructing the cryo chamber. We got some wiring here, which means that we are one step closer to building our stove that we just talked about. Here we could take a look at the traits that our survivors have. I won't go into too much detail about what all these traits are, but I'll go over them more once they become relevant. Gregory has the small eater and light sleeper traits. Nancy has the courageous trait and the wasteful trait, which means that she'll be pretty good at fighting, and we won't have her deconstructing anything anytime soon. Mark has the optimistic and unhygienic traits. And lastly, Lucy has the hands-on and pessimistic traits. The hands-on trait means that she'll craft things faster, so we'll probably have her doing a lot of our crafting stuff. Mark has finished deconstructing the sculpture, and that has yielded some rocks. Rocks are really good for an early game weapon because they have a low strength requirement and do a decent amount of damage. Now that we've deconstructed the sculpture, we have the weapons necessary to go out on an expedition safely, so we're going to do just that. We're going to start with Nancy. Her courageous trait means she'll be a good fighter because of the guaranteed first hit. And for our second person, we will be taking Gregory because he has the highest overall combined strength, intelligence, dexterity, and perception of anybody else in the family. This is the map screen. On the map, we can see it's relatively large. We spawn in the bottom left here. This is our shelter, right here. Now, to start with, we only have a very limited amount of energy, and that means we can only travel so far across the map. This will improve as we level up our suits if we want to improve our energy, which we will need to get to some of the farther locations. To start with, however, we'll just plan a basic route to some of our nearest buildings, and after those 3 buildings, we will hit up the towns on our right, because there's a decent cluster of buildings over there. After a bit of optimization, our route is set, and we're ready to gear up. So, the gear that we will be taking is the rocks from the sculpture. As you can see here, the stats are pretty decent, and that would be better stats than the pipe or the wood. We could bring both laser pistols with us, but that's kind of just unnecessary, and it's a worse melee weapon than the rocks are, and we don't really need to waste ammo, because most of the enemies we're going to be fighting early on are alone, so we don't have to worry about that too much. Nonetheless, we will equip Gregory with a pistol, just in case we run into something that we can't handle with melee. With that, we're all set to head out in the Wasteland. Back at the base, we'll have Lucy deconstruct the other 2 cryo chambers, and Mark can start deconstructing the beds. We're deconstructing these beds in order to gain the materials from them that is required to make the Tier 4 double comfy bed. It's a better bed overall, and there's no reason not to have a better object in our base. Fast forwarding a little bit, we have finished deconstructing the cryo chambers. Now let's talk about the item fabricator. In here, we can see that we can make pretty much any component in the game, and to do so, we need to salvage some of the materials that we already have. This is a very inefficient process. However, if we don't need the materials, then it's also not very efficient to just have them sitting in storage wasting space. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some hinges to work towards the stove with a handful of soap, wiring, and rocks. We don't need the soap or the excess rocks, and wiring will be in quite an abundance, so we don't have to worry about that. Next, we can use the materials we gained from deconstructing the beds to make a double comfy bed. This will allow 2 people to sleep in it at the same time, and it is the most comfortable bed, meaning that you gain rest the fastest in this. After queuing up the double bed, we tell Gregory to start searching the location they just arrived at. After Lucy finished deconstructing the cryo chambers, we will now have her make some medkits. Admittedly, I probably should have had her make some medkits before we had our caravan leave on an expedition, but it's too late for that now. Speaking of our caravan, they have arrived at the shack, and there is a mutant in the way. In combat, there are only a handful of options. You can melee, you can shoot, you can attempt to subdue the enemy, or you can steal. Subduing I haven't had much luck with. It requires a very high strength and a good weapon, and it's more reliable to just melee. Stealing is something more useful in the regular game mode, but even there it's not too useful. But in this game mode, we are just fighting mutants, and they don't have anything for us to steal. So with that in mind, we'll just melee them. We can see here that the only item the mutant had was the burnt clothes that he was wearing. We can see here that we have gained a little bit of experience points in both strength and dexterity after defeating the mutant. We also gained a small amount of trauma, but as long as we don't fight too many of the mutants in one expedition, we should be okay. Here we don't have enough inventory space to loot everything, so we will have to leave behind a few broken things. These items could be useful if we had a recycling plant. For example, we could have gained some plastic from the mannequin head, but the items that we have with us in our inventory are more important than those that we're leaving behind. Back at the base, Gregory then once again radios us that they have arrived at their next location. Our fabricator has finished with its first hinge, but before that we can start another one, our caravan has run into more mutants, and we'll just sneak away from these. There's no reason to stop at a house. A house doesn't normally have important items, so we'll just move on to the next place. While we probably would have been fine to fight the mutants anyway, we don't want to take risks that we don't need to take. Here we can see we need 2 more hinges for our stove, so we're going to start fabricating those. We'll use some more wiring and some rocks. Like I said before, wiring is in quite an abundance, and we don't need anything more than 4 rocks, 1 for each person. Okay, so our caravan has run into yet another mutant, and we'll just fight it. Gregory can go ahead and use melee. All 3 hits land, and that's 46 damage. And Nancy is able to finish him off. We grab another burnt cloth, gain some more XP, and continue on our way. Here's where I made quite a mistake. I didn't realize that the plants could continue growing more, so I just harvested them as soon as I could. And we could have gotten more from these, especially because these were fertilized, but in the end it won't hurt us too much, so we'll just keep planting some more. After they're done planting, they can go ahead and upgrade our toilet and shower buildings. So we'll start by having Lucy build a toilet, an efficient toilet, the tier 4 one, and we'll have Mark build the tier 4 efficient shower. After they build both of these things, they'll then go ahead and deconstruct our old toilet and shower. We won't be needing them for any reason because they're worse and less efficient. Next, we're informed that our caravan is making good progress, and they've arrived at the pharmacy. We'll tell them to begin searching, and fast forward until they have fully searched it, and then we will begin looting. So, now that our inventory is very full, we will be more limited in what we can bring. We'll grab everything that fits with what we had, and then we'll grab a handful of extra items. Here we can take a look at what can be made in the laboratory. I was just taking a quick look at what it takes to make ammo, and it is relatively cheap with only 1 battery and 3 pieces of metal. However, we don't need it right now, so we won't worry about it. Here I'm taking a look at what it takes to make some of the other items, and I'm bookmarking the item that is made for antibiotics because there's no other way that we can get antibiotics other than the homemade ones. Our fabricator has finished making yet another hinge, so we will queue up another one. This time we'll be using a little bit of wool, some wires, some plastic, and a rock. These are all very common items, so we have no problem getting rid of them. We are once again radioed that our caravan has run into mutants, but this time it's at a school, and schools can contain books, which is something we need not only for our win condition, but having books would allow our adult members something to do while back at the base. We're going with the usual combat strategy of meleeing with the pistol and then meleeing with the rock, and it works quite well, with Nancy finishing off the mutant as expected. Nancy has leveled up her strength from level 7 to level 8. Arriving at the school, we unfortunately don't find any books here. We'll grab all the things we can. Now, I'm considering bringing the broken shotgun along with us, and I'll decide that we will bring that along, because the shotgun is probably the best ranged weapon. Although the rifle does more damage, it doesn't have as many bullets in a clip. So if you were to shoot a clip of a shotgun, it would do more damage than a clip of the rifle. Nothing notable then happens until we arrive at our next destination, the farm, where we will grab a handful of things, but leave the rest. Here are the stats of all 3 guns in the game. On day 3, we receive yet another radio transmission from our caravan saying that everything is going great and they're moving on to the next location. Our caravan has arrived at the shack and we'll grab everything we can, and we will get rid of the broken shotgun in favor of a circuit board. Now, while a shotgun would be great, it's not super important to have because melee weapons tend to be better anyways, and the circuit board is a piece that we need in order to build the recycling plant. Now that our fabricator has finished making the 3rd hinge, we can have Lucy go ahead and construct our excellent stove, which, once it's finished, we can have both Mark and Lucy finally get a bite of something to eat. A little bit later, our caravan has arrived at yet another shack, and we'll go with the usual process of grab what we can and leave what we can't. Fast forward a little bit, and our caravan has arrived at the house, and we will once again grab everything we can and leave everything we can't. Now we'll send Mark to bed. He could use a little bit of rest, and he has nothing better to do anyways. Now that Lucy has finished constructing the stove, we will have her go ahead and eat her first meal of this playthrough. After she's done eating, she can go ahead and water the plants, and we will wake Mark up to water the plants as well. Our caravan then radios us and tells us that they have found some mutants at the school, and we will engage them in combat. And by mutants, there is only one, as per usual, so we will go ahead and just melee them as we usually do. With all hits landing, everything goes according to plan, and we will grab his burnt clothes and move on. After a little bit more XP, Nancy has upgraded her dexterity to level 10. It's halfway to the maximum level. Shortly after, they arrive at the school, and upon searching it, we have a handful of items, not many of which are important, but we'll grab them anyway. The next place they arrive at is the police station, and we'll tell them to search it right away. Here we can see that one of Mark's traits is unhygienic, which means that if we have him stay with the dirty cleanliness for a while, he will eventually become hygienic, which means he'll need to take showers less often. This means that we'll turn him off of automatically tending to his needs, so that way we can have him stay dirty for a while. Now that we've finished looting the police station, I think it's about time that we wrap up this episode. In the next episode, we will be continuing on our caravan and continuing our adventures of surviving the Wasteland. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, then I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up. Of course, if you want to support the channel further, then you could subscribe to stay up to date. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.